Hey Neppers, it's me, Wild Neptune, and in this Epic 7 video, we are going over the stages of an account. What does that mean? Well, before I tell you, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, comment, and follow me at Twitch at twitch.tv/Wild Neptune. I thank everybody for all the support. Let's get going. As some of you are probably aware, on the official Epic 7 Discord, you might have seen an ad for it in the game. If not, there'll be a link down below in the description. But there is something called Question of the Week. It is a little poll, or survey, I should say, that Epic 7 puts out, where you answer questions about what's happening in the game, what do you like, what do you don't like, suggestions, and all of that stuff. It is free to do, you get 2 leaves, and suitably, they ask a question, well, every week. And there is a preliminary set of questions to get an idea on who is answering these, questions. And one of them is, are you in the early game, the mid game, or the late game? And this is important because what's important for a player who is just starting out is not going to be the same for a player who has been playing for a long time. And that got me thinking, do players actually know when they're in the early game, the mid game, or the late game? I would, at first, assume so, but I've heard some players talking, or seen them talking, and they're like, hey, I'm a mid-game player, and I'm looking at their account and what they're doing, and I'm like, no, you are a late-game player, 100%. So, this is why this video is being made. It is to give a stratification, if you would, of what exactly is early, mid, and late game. I say exactly, but of course, this is based on my opinion, and as we all know, my opinion is always right. So, take that as you would. Anyway, let's get started with the early game. I would call the early game the foundational, the building experience of your Epic 7 journey. It is when you're going to build the units for the core content of the game, and what would I call the core content? Well, it would be things like your adventure mode, and at least through episode 2, because a lot of new players, well, most all new players basically, will not be able to beat anything outside of episode 2, and even in episode 2, there will be a roadblock in the Straza fights. But you can get through them, and once you do, you will unlock the Specially Changed Roz quest. And this is why beating episode 2 is very important, because SC Roz is a very useful hero in both PvE and in PvP. And before I forget, early game does not necessarily mean new player. Normally it does, but not always, because with the power of the wallet, yes, with money, anything is possible in Epic 7, you can, go pretty fast through the early game, and, hit the mid and even late game pretty quickly. So, another early game thing that you will want to work towards quickly is your Wyvern Hunt. So, Wyvern Hunt is the most important hunt in the game. The majority of your units will be using Wyvern gear for the most part. Yes, I do know some players, they will start with Banshee Hunt because that's what they do, and play the game how you want to play it. I'm just telling you what I think the most optimal path is, and the most optimal path to me is through Wyvern, and this comes from the person who was the counter-attack person in E7WC, okay? Even I think that the Wyvern Hunt is the way to go when you start out. So, the reason why you want to do Wyvern Hunt is, again, the majority of your units will be using this gear, and it is the most flexible gear there is. So, you probably get through 11 pretty quickly. 12 too after 11. 13 will take you a little bit longer as the difficulty does spike pretty drastically in 13. But once you do it, would I say a 70% win rate or so, That's fine. Keep doing it. It'll be slow at first. You get better gear. It'll get faster, right? But keep in mind, too, that about every month or so, they have a buff event where one of the buffs is going to be you get more Wyvern or Hunt mats in general. Take advantage of these, especially if you're a free-to-play or a low spender, because energy is more plentiful, but you still want to use it to the best of your ability, right? Another thing that I would say is core content, at least if you are in the early game, and really any part of the game, is going to be your raid Labyrinth. So in order to unlock raid, I do believe you have to go to like chapter 5, something like, I forget where exactly. It's like one of the side stages in Unrecorded History. And once you do, you unlock normal raid. And the first couple bosses you can do aren't that hard, really. You want to get to a point, though, where you can beat all 5 bosses in 3 attempts. So this means building a team that has, I believe it's 34 morale, it might be 33, is the least amount of morale you can use. There are a lot of morale calculators on the interwebs and stuff like that. And the reason why you want to do these is because they drop a couple of very important things. One of them is going to be these Coronation Souvenirs. This is the raid currency for normal raid, and with these, I recommend you buy the the epic artifact charms. And they also drop these bug charms to enter into Hell Raid. They also drop these bookmarks. They're relatively rare, so don't expect them all that often. So that's right now what I would recommend you do in normal raid. Another thing I would say that towards the tail end of your early game journey, you will want to start building for are a couple of expos. The most important one is going to be the fire one, because they do drop the Wyvern Reforged mats. However, all expos are important because they all drop, well, they don't drop, they give you points in order to get this depot going. And this depot has a lot of good stuff in it that you are going to want to get, like molas, mod gem chests, right? So don't skimp out on that. Again, that's going to be one of the later things you do in the early, into the mid game. And probably the last thing you will really do in the early game, at least build for, is going to be for Arena. And when I say Arena, I mean normal Arena. You can't do RTA yet. I clicked that on accident. Normal Arena. And really only your offense. And so this probably means building a couple of PvP Arena-only heroes if you can. You want to do this because the higher you finish in your league, well, the more rewards you get, right? You get, not only do you get these first-time promotion rewards, but you get these weekly rewards too. And a lot of early game players, they don't do Arena at all, right? They'll do like a few fights a day, maybe like 3, 4, whatever, and they just get like, oh, you know, like 200 sky, like 225 sky stones, right? That's going up to like, say, gold 3 is, you know, another 100 or so sky stones, and that might seem like a lot, and it isn't. Oh, but by the way, never take these mystic metals. That's a scam. Always take the sky stones, no matter what, right? Every little bit counts, and what else counts too is getting these from the weekly rewards, because as a new player, you're gonna want to try to save up to buy the slate if possible. So the slate is a, as I try to click on this, okay, here we go. The slate, which I've already bought this this season, is a once per season item that lets you imprint a 5-star. And it costs 1,000 of these glory crests and 2,700 of these conquest points. And you get these by, well, beating teams in Arena, right? And this is the most important thing to save for. It might not give you the most immediate help, but it will give you the most long-term help overall. Of course, there'll be a couple of other side things you want to do when you're a early game player, and it's going to be doing some specialty changes. The first one you will probably ever do is going to be a Momo, and she's important because she can be used as a Wyvern tank. Admittedly, she's kind of middling as a tank, but she can work with proper gearing, and she's very strong as a PvE healer. Of course, I already mentioned a Roz for episode 2, but a lot of other heroes here will fill in various roles for various PvE and even PvP if you need them. But a Momo and a Roz are the first two that I would recommend you do in the early game. Other important ones that you might want to do later on are, say, Carbon Rose for things like the Light Expo. Carrot is still decent with PvP. Flurry can still be good. Pilot has proven to be useful against counterattack and PvP also. So don't sleep on really a lot of these units here. But we'll talk more about them later in the video as we get into the mid and late game. Another thing that you will want to do as a newer player in the early game is join a guild. So I will say, the first guild you join, unless you searched for a guild on like the Discord, or you got lucky, the first guild you joined is probably going to suck, right? And that's okay. As long as players are logging in, so this number is close to this number by the end of the day. I'm on EU, so it's still pretty early in the day for my guild. And they're doing guild wars, stuff like that. Like the guild leader is not forgetting to, what do you call it? Put, you know, accept the guild thing, whatever. Even though I don't really know if that still happens or not. You are good to go, right? Now, you want to go into guilds because you can get guild crests and these armbands in order to buy stuff from the guild shop. And you want to buy stuff from the guild shop, okay? You want to buy these Moldogora seeds every week. You want to buy these artifacts eventually. They will take a long time to save up for. And even me, in a higher level guild, getting these armbands is pretty slow, okay? And imagine not being in a guild for like a couple of months and not getting any of these for that period of time. That's a lot of wasted time where you can be doing almost nothing and just getting this stuff, right? So you will want to do that. Also, these lesser artifact charms too. Artifact charms are pretty rare, and it is what you are going to use the majority of these crests on, right? So don't be stingy. Donate 50k gold every day if you can. Donate 3 proofs of courage every day, right? Do your world boss. Do your guild wars. Even if you lose every single fight, that's fine, because you do get like a participation reward. Even if you only get 10 mystics every guild wars, that's better than 0. And don't be afraid of joining the guild just to leave like a couple months down the line, because you keep all of your crests and armbands and stuff like that too. There's just a slight delay before you can join another guild. So, to finish up the early game, going over some pitfalls and things you might want to think about or avoid as you're an early game player. And one of them is leaping before you look. And what does that mean is that I see a lot of early game / newer players show me a unit or they build a unit, and I'm thinking, why did he build this? Well, in some cases, I can tell that there are 2 reasons why they built it, but, you know, that is beside the point here. So take something like Ilyanov, right? Very well-designed unit, I might say. Don't build her in the early game. You actually probably don't want to build her in the mid or late game either, now that I think about it. Because she's not going to help you to progress in the early game. Units like Elfelt are probably not going to help you in the early game. And it's important to focus on units that are going to help you do what you need to do right now. Because in the early game, building units to 6 stars is actually kind of time-consuming. It's still time-consuming even for me, A player who's been playing for several years now, but in the early game, it is really slow. So you don't want to be wasting your resources on getting things like your hunt, going to adventure mode, getting those first couple of expo teams finished up, stuff like that, right? Another thing that is going to be kind of a roadblock for new players is going to be the gearing and the philosophy and your mindset of going about the gear. So if you come on the Epic 7 Discord, you'll see players like, well, admittedly myself, flash gear like this around, right? And you look at this gear and you think to yourself, wow, that's really good. I have to have all my units on gear like this? And to that I say, no. In fact, even I don't expect to have all my gear like this. That would be insane. No, your gear is going to be a combination of pretty good to Pepega, right? Because you have a lot of units, you will need to gear up for a lot of content. And as long as they're doing well enough to do whatever their job is for whatever content that they're doing, that is good enough for now. You will get better gear as time goes on, and able to move that worse gear onto other units you don't really care about as much. So, have your expectations be a little bit lower when you are doing your gearing as an early game player. On top of that, another thing that you will struggle with as a new player is going to be gold. And this is simply because you do have a lot of gear to upgrade as a newer player, and that means the gold sink is a lot higher for you. However, as you start going into the mid and late game, this becomes less and less of a problem because you actually have less and less gear that's upgrades for you. So, you know, you get more gold, but at what cost? The mid game is what I would call the expansion, or the, how should I say it, flushing out stage of the game. And this is when you're going to take the base, which you built during the early game, and branch it out into other content that you have not yet tackled. Content that is a little bit harder than the other ones. And one of that is going to be doing more than just Wyvern Hunt. As I do assume that your end goal is going to be doing something like World Arena, which will come a little bit later. And an important factor in doing World Arena is getting into Asthmatic Hunt for the immunity gear, and Banshee, as some units do work best on counter/lifesteal. And it has gotten to a point where it is almost required, quote-unquote, for certain heroes to have some of this gear. Katie's 2 is important, but that's going to be a little bit later on. So you will want to start building teams for both Banshee and for the Bug Hunt. Of course, too, we talked about normal raid, but now you also want to start building teams for a Hell raid. You do want to kill all 5 bosses a month. It is a monthly thing, because you do get the currency to buy a piece of gear. And it is really good gear that upgrades pretty well, right? You also want to do your Abyss around this time. You can kind of coast through Abyss for a little bit, but eventually you will probably get stuck. But you will want to start building units, and even maybe specific units, why is it this, there we go, units for Abyss, because the rewards for clearing it are very good. A lot of molas, a lot of sky stones, a lot of gold, and very good gear. Especially the 88 lifesteal and speed set gear can roll very well. And chances are you might get a piece that's at least usable, right? So I do recommend trying to climb an Abyss as high as you can when you're at the state of the game. Of course, Auto Tower 2. If in the early game, you could probably only do, say, levels 1 or 2. However, you do want to try to get as high as possible. I say if you're a mid-game player, level 4 is a good goal for you. If you think you can go higher, by all means try it, right? The other thing, too, you will want to try to do in the mid-game is going to be building teams for the other 4 expos. And this means Grass, Light, water and dark, which are on off rotation right now. And again, you want to do this for these rewards here and for the mod stones and the reforged materials. So that's really what the mid-game is about. It is just building teams for the harder content in the game. And what are some units you might want to use for these? Well, let's go all the way back here to the specialty change chart. And a lot of these heroes are really good in a lot of the stuff. Like A-Raz, he's a really good unit for things like, well, Abyss, for Grass Expo. He's decent for Light Expo. He can be used for Dark Expo. Zelicarbon Rose, really good for Light Expo. Helga can be used for Banshee Hunt, Light Expo, right? Sularina can be used for Fire Expo. Carrot, decent for PvP. Flurry, very good for Dark Expo, actually. And depending on if you have Rowana or not, very good for things like Blue Expo, the ice one, right? So, just a list of just 3-star heroes that you will be able to use for a lot of PvE content. On top of that, other 3-star heroes that you can use for a lot of content is something like Terranar Guard. He's a 3-star. He's had an emergency for about 3 years now, but good for the Fire Expo, decent for Wyvern Hunt, and very strong in Abyss. He is one of the strongest free-to-play options in Abyss, especially as you get higher up in the levels. So don't really sleep on Terranar Guard. Like in the early game, in the mid game, there's still some pitfalls and stuff that players might fall into, or maybe some psychological roadblocks that they had to deal with. And one of them is going to be investing in characters that they don't have to. And when saying invest, in this case, I do mean molas. So, I listed just before a bunch of 3-star heroes. And remember, 3 stars don't need molas to skill them up, that are usable to clear a lot of PvE content. And this is important, because I do find in the mid-game, oftentimes you are kind of unincentivized, right? But you get lazy and you end up, putting a molar or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 into a PvE only hero. And in some cases that's fine, right? Like Sigrid. She's gonna be using Wyvern all the time, so I think everybody puts some molds into her. Same thing for a unit like, say, Baiken, because she's gonna be your one-shot hero for something like Banshee if you have her. And you will need some of these in order to one-shot the Banshee, right? The other thing, too, you do have to look out for in the mid-game is your reforges. You will probably do a couple of reforges in the early game, too. But in the mid-game is when you are really going to start pushing those I-90 pieces of gear. And at this point in the game, make sure that those pieces are actually good. Because getting these is relatively not super hard anymore. But in the mid-game, until you get to, like, the later parts of the end game, you are going to need more of these. Then you have gear that you can upgrade. So you always have more gear to use these on. Right now, for me, I don't. Which is why I would say it's less important to really ration these out later on. But in the mid-game, it definitely is. You definitely want to take care in what you are reforging. So, the other thing is going to be World Arena. And during the later part of the mid-game is when you will probably start doing World Arena. And if you do it at the beginning of a season, you will most likely get crushed, right? There's no way around this. And I know a lot of players, they're like, I don't like doing World Arena. I got demolished a few times when I went in, right? If you're in the mid-game, just starting out, I think you had to expect to lose. Not only that, but most games that has a system like this with matchmaking, especially one like Epic 7, that doesn't have like hundreds of thousands, even tens of thousands of players maybe queuing at the same time, the matchmaking is going to be kind of rough, especially in the lower rankings. As the season goes on, and as you climb up the ranks, the matchmaking does get better. I would say successful matchmaking is when you feel like you could win or lose over half the time, is what I would call successful matchmaking. Now, how to get better at World Arena? Well, just keep doing it, right? Try new strategies, try new gear, new units that you have. You will need to build your roster to fill out your PvP endeavors, and once you do that, ask questions, look at guides, all of that stuff will help you get better in World Arena, because in the mid-game, I'll be honest with you, your peak is probably like Masters, if that. But that goal is more for the late game. The last part is going to be the late game, and there is a lot of content that is left to build for. The only real thing is going to be your Katie's Hunt, and it's because I would say that the late game is your optimization phase. It is when you have everything pretty much built up, and now you're just filling in tiny gaps that you have left over, and one of them is going to be your Katie's Hunt, because this is what I would call the optimization hunt. It is where you start replacing some gear with other gear. Like this penetration gear that you can get is a very strong set that is best in slot on a lot of heroes, but they don't need penetration gear to be used. It is just slightly better on them, right? The only hero I would say that needs a set from Katie's Hunt is Bellion, and that's the injury set. And this is because Injury Bellion is so much better than all the other Bellions that I kind of think you're inting if you don't use it on her. Of course, you might need to get the end game or late game if you want to clear the rest of Abyss. And just because you haven't done Abyss or done things like even beat episode 3 or 4 in story mode does not mean you're not in the late game, because these are more things that players don't do because they're lazy more than not being able to do it. And to those of you, I would say stop being lazy and do this content. Like I said in the mid-game part, there are a lot of good rewards for doing your Abyss and for your adventure mode. Episode 3 gives you tons of Sky Stones, tons of Molas, right? Abyss, the gear that you get can be very good. And if you are serious about wanting to push into World Arena, well, you will want to try to get some of that gear. The other thing that you will also want to build for in the late game is going to be your arena defense team. So, towards the tail end of the early game and beginning of the mid game, we worked on our arena offense to do your attacks. But in the late game, you will want to focus on your defense team. And this is because a lot of players around this time don't really do arena a lot. It really depends. Like, I'm on EU, where doing arena seems to be more of a thing on this server for whatever reason. I don't really know why. But if you want to just stay in Champion without a lot of work, you want a defense team that is not going to instantly fall over to everything that attacks you, right? And because if you have like a 5% defense rate, well, your arena ranking is going to fall faster than you can climb back up. And that's kind of problematic because, like I said, the higher your league is when you finish, the more rewards you get every week. And the reason why you don't do this before the late game is because you probably don't have a fleshed out enough roster to use the defense heroes necessary in order to have a team like this. And admittedly, defense teams for Arena are relatively restrictive, so you might not even be able to build an optimal defense team, but just having one that even gets like a 30% defense rate is better than a lot of players are able to do. So obviously the end goal for most players is going to be World Arena. We built a little bit of this in the mid game, but in the late games when you're really going to start building your roster for World Arena, so the majority of the heroes you build will probably be for this, as long as you care about the content. I know some players, they don't do it at all and just play for some of the PvE, and that's perfectly fine. Play the game how you want to play it. But, like I said, I'm going to assume that most players will want to do this, at least hit Masters for the skin, and in the late game, Masters is a realistic goal. I believe everybody in the late game, if they grind enough and aren't too prepega in their decision making, will be able to hit Masters if they start early enough in a season. If you're in the late game, there really aren't any hints or pitfalls for you. You probably know most of the things to avoid and to do and not to do. I will say, one way to know you're in the late game is when you look at a piece of gear like this, which I reforged, and you did it, and the only reason you did it is because you had to do it to get to 65 effectiveness to hit that threshold for a hunt, right? Stuff like that is what you do when you're in the late game. It is when you're able to build units for testing, like Christy here, which I built only because I think she's cute. Also, she actually worked pretty well in some of the bit stages, so she was kind of useful too in some content. And late game is when you're actually able to potentially experiment with units in the game you might not have used before. Now, like I said in the mid game, be careful, because experimenters are the guinea pigs. They're the players that invest in units that might not end up being good down the line. So there is risk, but there's also reward, satisfaction. I can't talk. Satisfaction in knowing that you help promote a unit or strategy in some way. With that though, I hope this has cleared up what the early, mid, and late game might be like. Again, this is my opinion, but I think it is a good general basis on what a player might go through each stage of the game. Anyway, it's been a good one. Nep out.